A single spiral appears on artifacts separated by thousands of miles and centuries. This video investigates the astonishing design parallels linking Bronze Age civilizations across continents. You will gain a new perspective that transforms the ancient world from isolated societies into a deeply interconnected network of ideas. How did identical symbols for the sun and sacred animals emerge in lands divided by vast oceans? What does this shared visual language tell us about humanity's earliest long-distance conversations? Are you prepared to see the familiar patterns of history in a completely new way? This was a world in motion, a planet humming with the first whispers of globalization long before the word existed. For roughly 2,000 years, from around 3,300 to 1,200 before Common Era, humanity's story shifted from scattered villages to grand, interconnected stages. In Mesopotamia, the Ziggurats of pierced the sky. Along the Nile, the pyramids stood as eternal monuments. On Crete, the palace of Knossos unfolded in labyrinthine splendor, while in the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro boasted sophisticated grids and plumbing. These were not isolated experiments. They were pulses in a vast, beating heart connected by veins of commerce and curiosity. The revolutionary metal that gave the age its name, bronze, was itself a product of connection, requiring tin and copper from often distant lands. This necessity bred networks, routes etched across deserts and seas, along which caravans and ships carried not just ingots and jewels, but something far more intangible. They carried ideas. A merchant from Mesopotamia might barter with a trader from the Indus Valley. An Egyptian envoy might gift artifacts to a Minoan prince. In these exchanges, alongside spices and textiles, stories were shared, artistic styles were admired, and symbols were seen, remembered, and reinterpreted. This was a slow, organic conversation, not a broadcast. It happened over generations through the quiet osmosis of cultural contact. To grasp how a spiral carved in stone in Scotland could mirror one on a seal in Pakistan, we must first see this canvas not as a collection of separate paintings, but as a single, sprawling mural, where the brushstrokes of one civilization could, over centuries, gently bleed into the space of another. There on the sun-baked wall of a Minoan palace, a spiral turns in stone, its coils precise and deliberate. Thousands of miles to the north, etched into the damp, dark face of a tomb in Ireland's Boyne Valley, the same form emerges from the rock. This is not a coincidence of shape but a convergence of thought. The spiral stands as perhaps humanity's most ancient and shared punctuation mark, a visual breath held in awe before the mysteries of existence. Across the scattered civilizations of the Bronze Age, this elegant, winding line became a silent vocabulary for concepts too vast for early words. It mapped the turning of the seasons, the unfurling of a fern, the swirling path of celestial bodies across the night sky. In its continuous curve, our ancestors saw the very pulse of life, death, and rebirth made visible. Archaeologists like Marija Gimbutas interpreted its prevalence, particularly in old European contexts, as deeply tied to reverence for regenerative forces in nature, often embodied in feminine divine principles. It was a symbol of becoming, not just being. This core idea manifested in stunning variety. In Celtic lands, it evolved into the triskel, three interlocked spirals representing motion and the triad of earth, sea, and sky. On Mesopotamian cylinder seals, tightly wound spirals framed scenes of ritual, perhaps denoting the labyrinthine journey of the spirit or the endless cycle of cosmic order. The Minoans integrated it into the very architecture of their palaces, with spiral-form columns and fresco borders that seemed to channel energy through the buildings. What makes this symbol so compelling in our search for connections is its simultaneous universality and specificity. While a simple spiral could arise independently as a basic artistic gesture, the consistent attribution of profound, layered meanings to it across continents suggests something more. It points to a fundamental human inclination to process the cyclical nature of reality through this particular, graceful form. When a Bronze Age artisan in Crete carved a spiral and another in the Indus Valley, incised one on a seal, they were likely answering the same profound questions with the same visual solution. They were translating the invisible cycles of the cosmos into a line one could trace with a finger, a shared symbol for the great turning of the world. But a spiral is a whisper compared to the thunderous impact of the technology that gave this age its name. The mastery of bronze did far more than forge stronger swords or sharper plows. It forged a new language, one etched not in clay tablets, but directly into the gleaming surfaces of the objects that traveled the world. This was a revolution of replication. Imagine a skilled artisan in Anatolia, patiently carving a complex design of a sun disk and a bull into a block of clay. This becomes a mold. Into it, he pours molten bronze, a river of liquid metal that captures every detail. Once cooled, the mold can be broken away, and the symbol is born again, perfectly reproduced on a ceremonial axe or a royal cup. This was the power of the reusable mold and the later lost wax technique, methods that allowed for the mass production, not of goods but of meaning. A single, powerful symbol could now be stamped out 100 times, 1,000 times, on objects destined for trade, tribute, or gift-giving. When that Anatolian axe, gleaming with its solar bull, traveled north on a trade caravan or south on a merchant ship, it carried more than economic value. It carried a complete visual idea. The recipient, perhaps a chieftain in the Balkans or a merchant prince in the Levant, would see this foreign object and immediately recognize the craftsmanship. But they would also absorb its iconography. The bull might not mean the same thing in their culture, but its association with strength, with the divine, with royalty, was often universal enough to be understood and then adopted. This is how bronze became the first global mass medium. The symbols cast into it were not just decorations. They were standardized badges of power, faith, and identity that circulated along the same routes as the copper and tin used to make them. A serpent coiling around a staff on an Egyptian bronze mirror might find an echo in the serpent motifs on bronze belts from Central Europe. The fierce lions that guarded Mesopotamian palace gates in stone were miniaturized and cast onto bronze chariot fittings, their image racing across continents. This technological conduit created a curious homogenization at the highest levels of society. Elite iconography began to speak a similar visual dialect, a kind of international language of prestige. A king in one region might commission a bronze seal featuring a griffin, a mythical creature combining eagle and lion to signify his otherworldly power. Through trade, that image reaches another kingdom where local artisans, impressed by its authority, begin incorporating their own version of the griffin into jewelry and weaponry for their rulers. The original meaning might blur or shift, but the visual link is forged quite literally in metal. This was not a top-down imposition of culture, but a bottom-up adoption through admiration and aspiration. The bronze object itself, as a coveted item of technology and art, validated the symbols it bore, allowing them to cross cultural boundaries with an authority that a painted pot or a woven textile might not have possessed. So when we look at these matching spirals or similar beasts, we are not just seeing a shared thought. We are often seeing the physical footprint of a trade route, the lasting impression of a mold, and the silent, powerful diplomacy conducted not with words, but with the durable, travel-ready language of cast bronze. Yet the most profound symbol to travel these bronze highways was not forged in a furnace but blazed daily in the sky above. The sun disk, in its countless variations, became the closest thing the ancient world had to a universal logo. From the scorching sands of Egypt to the misty forests of northern Europe, this simple circle with radiating lines spoke a language every culture understood. It was far more than a drawing of a star. It was a compact, powerful idea, a visual shorthand for the forces that governed all life. In Egypt, this concept reached a magnificent peak with the winged sun disk, a symbol of the god Horus Beidit. Here, the sun was not a passive orb. It was a divine protector, its wings outstretched in a gesture of shelter, often carved over temple doorways and on the lintels of royal tombs. It declared that the pharaoh ruled under the sun's direct authority, that cosmic order and earthly kingship were one and the same. This was the sun as active, watchful deity. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the sun god Shamash was represented by a different but related emblem. Often, it was a disk with 4 wavy or triangular rays emanating from its core, sometimes set within a gate or doorway to signify his role as a bringer of justice and truth, illuminating the darkness of falsehood. The core components were identical, a central circle and projecting arms, yet the cultural inflection changed. The symbol adapted to local myth, becoming a badge for a different aspect of the sun's power, its role as divine judge. But the most fascinating adaptations occur when we look beyond these great empires to the edges of the known world. In the Indus Valley, seals have been found stamped with a striking motif, a circle evenly divided by a cross. Archaeologists sometimes call this a wheel cross or a circled cross. To the artisans of Mohenjo-Daro, its precise meaning is lost to us, but its form is unmistakable, a radiant sun simplified into its most essential geometric elements. Then, thousands of miles and centuries away, the same symbol appears pecked into the granite bedrock of Scandinavia. On rocks in Sweden and Norway, Bronze Age artists carved this very same circled cross, often alongside ships and spirals. They are known as solar wheels or sun crosses, and they are thought to represent the sun chariot, the wheel of the sky god, traversing the heavens. This is where the connection moves beyond the plausible and into the deeply suggestive. How do we explain the same elegant solution, a circle quartered by a cross, appearing in the urban centers of the Indus and the tribal lands of the north? Independent invention is always possible. The sun is round, and humans naturally divide circles into quarters. But when this specific geometric representation is consistently loaded with sacred, solar meaning across such vast divides, it hints at something more. It suggests that the core idea, the sun as a central, radiating source of order and life, was a conceptual package that could travel. A trader from the east might carry a seal stamped with that Indus Valley sun wheel. A northern chieftain, receiving it as a curiosity, might see not just a strange mark, but a powerful symbol of celestial power that resonated with his own beliefs. The form was adopted, translated, and integrated. It was not copied exactly, but its soul, its central meaning, was recognized and claimed. This shared reverence points to a fundamental human experience. Every one of these cultures lived by the agricultural cycle, by the precise rhythm of days and seasons dictated by the sun. Its daily victory over darkness and its annual return after winter were not abstract facts. They were the drama of survival, so they all reached for similar visual metaphors to contain that immense power, converging on a circle with lines of force, of light, of influence streaking outward. The sun disk, in all its forms, tells us that while their gods had different names and their rituals unique steps, these Bronze Age people were all answering the same awe-inspiring question, and they were sketching remarkably similar answers in the durable languages of stone, metal, and clay. While the sun offered a celestial anchor, Another symbol rooted itself in the very earth, in the muscle and might of the living world. The bull stands as a second pillar in this shared visual language, an icon of raw power that resonated from palace courtyards to river valleys. Its veneration makes immediate practical sense. In agricultural societies, the bull was a living engine of prosperity. It pulled the plow, its strength turned the soil, and its lineage ensured the herd's survival. It was wealth on the hoof, a cornerstone of the economy. But across these scattered civilizations, the bull consistently transcended its earthly role to become something far greater, a divine intermediary. In Minoan Crete, the famous bull leaping frescoes from the Palace of Knossos capture more than a sport or a ritual. They depict a breathtaking, dangerous dance between humanity and the sacred beast. Leapers, both male and female, are shown vaulting over the bull's back, grasping its horns in a display of agility that seems to channel the animal's explosive energy. This was not a conquest but a communion. The bull here is a force of nature, a conduit to divine power, and the human participants, through their graceful courage, momentarily align themselves with that power. The act transformed the bull from livestock into a living symbol of the god's favor and the kingdom's vitality. Far to the east, in the royal cemetery of in Mesopotamia, we find a different but equally profound expression. Here, excavators discovered the magnificent great lyre of Its sound box is crowned by a sculpted bull's head, crafted in gold and lapis lazuli, with eyes of shell and lapis that still seem to hold a watchful gaze. This was no mere decoration. Music was sacred, a bridge to the divine, and the instrument that created it was given the face of a celestial being. The bull here becomes the voice of the gods, its majestic form guaranteeing that the melodies produced would be worthy of the heavens. Meanwhile, on the seals of the Indus Valley cities, the bull appears again, but with a distinctive local character. The most famous seal from Mohenjo-Daro depicts a powerfully built, humped bull standing in profile, its head lowered with a single horn shown in a clever perspective. It is a creature of immense, patient strength, often shown before a ritual object that some researchers interpret as an incense burner or a sacred standard. The bull here is not shown in a narrative scene of leaping or music, but in a static, iconic pose, a standalone emblem of authority, and possibly a vehicle for a deity. This repetition of the bull as a sacred focus from the Aegean to the Indus points to a shared conceptual leap. These cultures independently recognized the bull's immense physical power, and then, almost universally, decided that such power must have a supernatural source. It became a default avatar for masculine potency, for the kingly authority of the gods, and for the fertile, untamable forces of nature. But the symbol traveled in more abstract forms, too. The horn itself became a portable token of this divine connection. We see this in the horned headdresses of Mesopotamian deities, and centuries later, in the ritual headgear of early European cultures. The Viking predecessors, for instance, did not actually wear horned helmets into battle, but such horns appear in ceremonial contexts, likely linking the wearer to the strength and sanctity of the sacred animal. Even more telling are the horned altars or protomes found across the Mediterranean and Near East. These are stone altars or stands, often from shrines, whose corners are carved into the shapes of stylized bull horns. To offer a sacrifice upon such an altar was to place it directly under the sign of the bull, to funnel human devotion through the symbol of ultimate earthly and divine strength. This distillation of the bull into its most potent feature, the horn, shows how the symbol could be simplified, abstracted, and transmitted. A trader might not transport a live bull, but he could carry a small amulet in the shape of horns, or he could describe the horned altars he saw in foreign temples. The core idea, the connection between the curve of a horn and the favor of the gods, was transferable. So when we trace this symbol, we see a fascinating spectrum. From the dynamic, living bull of the Minoan fresco, to the static, emblematic bull on the Indus seal, to the pure geometric form of the horn on an altar, we are watching the same profound idea being adapted to fit different artistic styles, religious practices, and materials. It tells us that while the sun represented a universal celestial clock, the bull represented a universal earthly battery, a symbol of the concentrated power that made civilization itself possible. Its widespread sacred status is a testament to a shared Bronze Age understanding, a silent agreement that the mightiest forces in their world deserved a place at the very heart of their art, their rituals, and their vision of the divine. But power and order were not the only forces our ancestors sought to understand. They also felt the presence of a deeper, more enigmatic world just beneath the surface of reality. To give form to this hidden realm, they turned to a creature that moved between earth and underworld without a sound. The serpent, and its mythic cousin the dragon, coiled its way into the sacred art of every major Bronze Age civilization, becoming a third universal symbol in this cross-continental language. Unlike the radiant sun or the tangible bull, the serpent represented something profoundly ambiguous. It was a creature of both wisdom and chaos, a protector of treasures and a denizen of the deep. This duality made it the perfect emblem for the unseen forces that governed fate, knowledge, and the cycle of life and death. In the sun-drenched land of Egypt, the serpent's protective power was distilled into a single, potent icon, the Uraeus. This stylized cobra, reared and ready to strike, was fixed to the brow of the pharaoh's crown. It was not merely decoration, it was a living weapon of divine defense. The Uraeus was the eye of the sun god Ra, a spit of fire against the pharaoh's enemies. It transformed the ruler's forehead into a fortress, declaring that to challenge the king was to invite the venomous judgment of the gods themselves. Here, the serpent was chaos domesticated, its dangerous power harnessed and directed outward to guard the very source of cosmic order. Travel east to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, and the serpent evolved into a more complex hybrid. The Mashusu was a magnificent dragon-like creature, a composite being with the body of a serpent, the forelegs of a lion, and the hind legs of a bird of prey. It served as the sacred animal of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, and was famously depicted on the city's Ishtar Gate, glazed in brilliant blue and gold. The Mashusu was not a mindless monster. It was a divine guardian, a vigilant sentinel placed at the thresholds of temples and cities to ward off malevolent spirits. It embodied a fusion of the serpent's cunning, the lion's strength, and the eagle's sovereignty, a perfect mythological guardian for the treasures and secrets of the gods. This role as guardian of the sacred and the hidden is the thread that binds the serpent symbol across astonishing distances. In the emerging Bronze Age cultures of China, the dragon was already taking shape as a benevolent, rain-bringing power, yet one deeply connected to the watery depths and the spiritual world. In the mythologies that would crystallize in ancient Greece, the serpent Ladon guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides, while the great python protected the oracle at Delphi, the very navel of the world where truth was revealed. What does this persistent pattern reveal? It points to a deep-seated archetype, a story the human mind seems predisposed to tell. The serpent, by its very nature, lives in holes in the ground near springs and in shadowy places. It sheds its skin in a miraculous act of renewal. To ancient observers, it was a creature intimately linked to the underworld, to the sources of water and fertility, and to the mystery of rebirth. It knew the secrets of the earth. Therefore, what better guardian for the things humanity held most precious, whether it was the pharaoh's life, a temple's sanctity, or a source of prophetic wisdom? The treasure it protected was often knowledge itself, the hidden truths of creation, medicine, or the future. This was not a symbol traded in bronze molds like the sun disk, but something perhaps more profound. It was an idea born from a universal human experience, the encounter with a creature that was both feared and fascinating. That shared experience led to a shared metaphor. The serpent became the default visual code for the boundary between the known and the unknown. Whether as the coiled uraeus on a royal crown or the scaled mushasu on a city gate, its message was consistent. Here lies a threshold. What lies beyond is powerful, dangerous, and sacred. You are being watched. In this way, the silent, sliding form of the serpent became one of humanity's first and most enduring security systems, a psychological sentinel carved into the collective imagination, reminding every Bronze Age culture that the most valuable things in existence required a guardian from the world just out of sight. But these grand symbols needed a passport to travel the world, a way to move from palace walls and temple altars into the hands of merchants and administrators thousands of miles away. That passport was often no larger than a thumb, carved from stone and worn around the neck. The humble seal, whether the cylindrical roller of Mesopotamia or the square stamp of the Indus Valley, was the unsung hero of this symbolic exchange. We must not mistake them for mere bureaucratic stamps. In an age before paper signatures or digital codes, these were objects of profound personal and official power. An artisan would spend weeks, perhaps months, carving a tiny, intricate scene in reverse into a piece of lapis lazuli, hematite, or steatite. When rolled or pressed into soft clay, it left a raised, positive image, a unique mark of identity. This clay blob might seal the knot on a sack of grain, lock the lid of a storage jar, or authenticate the bottom of a cuneiform tablet recording a shipment of copper. Every time a merchant broke that seal, he was breaking the word of its owner. But in that moment of practical security, something magical happened. The seal was also a portable art gallery, a miniature universe of meaning pressed into a mundane transaction. A Mesopotamian cylinder seal might depict a hero grappling with two lions, the so-called master of animals motif, asserting human dominance over chaotic nature. An Indus Valley stamp seal might show a yogic figure seated in meditation, surrounded by animals, suggesting a lord of the beasts of a different, more peaceful kind. Or it might feature that single, iconic humped bull. When the sack of grain sealed with that bull motif arrived in a distant port, the workers breaking the seal didn't just see an administrative mark. They saw a powerful, foreign symbol. They might not have understood its specific religious meaning, but they recognized its authority, its craftsmanship, and its visual potency. This was the most passive yet most effective form of cultural diffusion. No missionary or conqueror was deliberately spreading these images. They were hitchhiking. They traveled silently in the cargo holds of ships and in the saddlebags of donkeys, embedded in the very process of trade. A merchant from Dilmun in the Persian Gulf might use a seal featuring a Mesopotamian god to authorize a trade with someone from the Indus Valley. That Indus merchant receiving the sealed goods would see the image, perhaps ask about it, and carry the memory of that strange, powerful figure back home. Later, a local artisan, inspired by the tale or by a borrowed seal itself, might incorporate elements of that foreign god into a new seal for a local chieftain, blending the imported idea with native styles. The sacred tree motif, another common seal design, spread in this very way. A stylized tree of life, often flanked by animals or deities, appears on seals from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. It symbolized fertility, cosmic connection, and abundance. As sealed goods moved, this elegant, abstracted tree took root in new artistic traditions, its branches subtly changing shape to suit local tastes, but its core meaning remaining recognizably intact. This made the seal network incredibly robust. Unlike a large bronze statue that might be melted down, or a fresco that could not be moved, seals were personal, durable, and constantly in use. They were reproduced not by casting, but by impression, leaving their mark on hundreds of clay documents and containers that, when broken, often left the seal itself to be used again and again. Each sealed object became a tiny, disposable pamphlet for a foreign iconography. So, while kings exchanged grand gifts of weapons and jewelry, the real day-to-day work of building a shared visual language was done by accountants, warehouse managers, and traders. They weren't trying to spread culture, they were trying to ship wool, wine, and tin. Yet, with every roll of their cylinder seal or press of their stamp, they were inadvertently authorizing the transfer of something far more enduring than commodities. They were stamping passports for gods, heroes, and sacred animals, sending them on journeys across continents, and quietly weaving a common thread of visual thought into the fabric of the Bronze Age world. Yet the most powerful connections are often the simplest, etched not in the form of gods or beasts, but in the silent, perfect language of geometry. Beyond the sun disk and the sacred bull, a more abstract design lexicon was at work, one built from circles, spirals, and a mesmerizing pattern known as the meander. This was not art in service of a story, but art in service of an idea, a pure expression of order and infinity that seems to have resonated in minds across the ancient world. The Greek meander, also called the key pattern, is a perfect example. It is a continuous, winding line of right angles folding back on itself in an endless, labyrinthine ribbon. To trace its path is to be led on a journey with no beginning and no end. This same intricate, interlocking motif appears with stunning similarity on artifacts separated by vast continents. It edges the rims of ceremonial Chinese bronzes from the Shang dynasty, forming a border of eternal continuity. It is meticulously laid in mosaics on the floors of grand buildings in the Indus Valley cities. And it weaves its way into the textile patterns and pottery designs of cultures from Central America to the British Isles. This cannot be explained by trade in a specific object. No one was shipping Greek vases to prehistoric Britain or Chinese tripods to the Indus. Instead, this points to a shared cognitive breakthrough, a collective human step into a new way of seeing. The precise, mathematical repetition of these patterns reveals an advanced understanding of symmetry, rhythm, and space. Creating a perfect, continuous meander requires planning, a grasp of modular units, and a sense of the whole before the first line is drawn. It speaks of societies that valued harmony and balance not just in their myths, but in the very fabric of their visual world. Why would such different cultures converge on this specific, complex pattern? The answer may lie in what it represents. The meander is a visual metaphor for the labyrinth, for the journey of life, for the eternal flow of a river or the unbroken thread of fate. Its endless path suggests infinity. Its interlocking parts speak of interconnectedness. It is order made beautiful. This geometric grammar became a kind of non-verbal code, a universal aesthetic principle that decorated everything from the hem of a priestess's garment to the facade of a temple. When an artisan in one region developed a pleasing, rhythmic pattern, it solved a fundamental human desire for visual order. That solution, once discovered, proved to be incredibly contagious. The idea could travel independently, sparked by similar advancements in mathematics and craftsmanship in different regions. Or, in some cases, the pattern itself could have been transferred along the same long-distance routes that carried seals and bronzes, inspiring local artists to adapt its principle. A trader might have seen a textile with a key pattern border in a distant market and remembered not the cloth, but the compelling, logical design, which he then described to a weaver back home. This geometric language transcended literal meaning. A spiral on a pot in Scotland and a spiral on a seal in Pakistan might have held different specific prayers, but their shared form communicated a shared reverence for cyclical time. A meander on a Chinese bronze and a meander on a Greek vase both declared a belief in an orderly, interconnected universe. This was a harmony that resonated on a frequency deeper than myth or language. It spoke directly to the human brain's innate love for rhythm, repetition, and predictable structure. In decorating their world with these patterns, our Bronze Age ancestors were doing more than making things beautiful. They were using a common geometric vocabulary to inscribe a profound, silent truth onto the surfaces of their lives, a truth about the eternal, interwoven, and beautifully patterned nature of existence itself. This geometric harmony finds its ultimate expression in a single, unforgettable image. A hero stands firm, his powerful arms outstretched, each hand gripping the throat of a rampant lion. This is the master of animals, an icon that captured the Bronze Age imagination with a force few other symbols could match. It is a scene of perfect, tense balance. The central figure, sometimes bearded and clearly human, other times adorned with elements of the divine, does not merely conquer the beasts, he orchestrates them. The lions, or sometimes bulls or serpents, rear in mirrored fury, their bodies forming a dynamic arch around his still, commanding form. This motif was not confined to one kingdom or one material. We find it incised on Mesopotamian cylinder seals, pressed into the clay of administrative documents. It shines from Minoan gold signet rings worn by elites on the island of Crete. Centuries later, it reappears, stylized and fierce, in the goldwork of the nomadic Scythians on the Eurasian steppe. Its journey across thousands of miles and years presents a compelling mystery. What idea was so potent, so universally needed, that cultures from the Aegean to Central Asia kept returning to this specific visual equation? Scholars offer different lenses through which to view this powerful figure. One interpretation sees pure political statement. In an age where kings derived their authority from the gods, the master of animals was the ultimate metaphor for royal power. It proclaimed the ruler's divine right to control the chaotic, untamed forces of nature, to bring order to the wilderness, and to protect the civilized world from the beasts that lurked beyond the city walls. The hero becomes the king, and the lions become every threat, internal or external, that he holds in check through his sanctioned might. Yet another perspective looks past the palace to the spiritual realm. Here, the central figure is not a political ruler but a mediator, a shaman or a priestly figure who stands between the human world and the raw power of the animal spirits. His grip on the beasts is not one of domination but of communion. He channels their wild energy, balances their opposing forces, and translates their primal strength into a benefit for the community. In this view, the motif depicts a sacred act of negotiation with the natural world, a visual prayer for harmony between humanity and the other creatures that shared the land. At its most philosophical, the image becomes a diagram of the cosmos itself. The two opposing animals represent the fundamental dualities of existence, chaos and order, life and death, earth and sky. The hero in the center is the axis mundi, the world pillar that holds these opposing forces in a productive, dynamic tension. His mastery is not about eradication, but about maintaining a necessary creative balance. This cosmological reading may explain the motif's incredible transferability. A traveling artisan carrying this design in his mental repertoire was not just carrying a picture of a strongman with lions. He was carrying a versatile template for explaining how the universe worked. When he arrived in a new land, he could adapt the details. The hero might take on local features or be associated with a local deity. The lions might become the region's most fearsome predator, like a tiger or a bear. But the core composition, the symmetrical struggle, the central figure of control, remained intact because it answered a deep, cross-cultural question about humanity's place in a world full of powerful, often frightening forces. This icon moved because it was a complete thought, a pre-packaged philosophy of power and balance that could be understood without a single shared word. It traveled on the tiny surfaces of seals, was woven into the plots of epic tales told around campfires along trade routes, and was reimagined by the hands of goldsmiths and stone carvers who recognized in its perfect symmetry a truth that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The master of animals may have tamed the land, but the real magic happened on the water. The Mediterranean Sea, cradled by 3 continents, was not a barrier but a shimmering, liquid highway for the Bronze Age mind. Its relatively predictable currents and dotted islands created a stage for the world's first great maritime network, a bustling aquatic corridor where ships became the primary couriers for an entire civilization's worth of symbols. While overland caravans crept across deserts, these wooden vessels powered by sail and oar could move ideas with startling speed. A voyage from the Nile Delta to the coast of Crete might take mere weeks, a blink in archaeological time. This connectivity transformed the sea from a void on the map into the most dynamic studio for cultural fusion the ancient world had ever known. The cargo manifests were deceptively simple. Ingots of copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources to the east, jars of olive oil, scented resins, and gleaming gold jewelry. But nestled between these tangible treasures were the passengers that truly reshaped history, skilled artisans and their boundless creativity. A potter from the Levant might find himself employed in a Mycenaean palace, his techniques for shaping clay merging with local decorative tastes. A Minoan fresco painter could be commissioned to decorate the walls of an Egyptian noble's villa, bringing the fluid, naturalistic style of Crete to the banks of the Nile. We see this fluid exchange in stunning, concrete discoveries. In the delta of Egypt, at the site of Avaris, archaeologists uncovered fragments of breathtaking frescoes within a palace complex. The scenes were unmistakable, bull leapers and acrobats vaulting in a style that could only have come from Minoan Crete. These were not cheap imitations. They were the work of master painters, either Cretan artists who had sailed east or Egyptian painters so thoroughly trained in the Minoan style that the line between cultures blurred on the plaster wall. Far to the north, on the Greek mainland, excavations of grand tombs have yielded storage jars from Canaan, their distinctive handles and clay composition telling a story of oil or wine imported across the sea, and with it the subtle aesthetic of the vessel's shape. This maritime network created a constant, churning dialogue. A symbol born in one port could be sketched on a wax tablet, described in a story, or etched on a piece of portable ivory, and find itself reinterpreted in a new material 1,000 miles away by the next full moon. The island of Cyprus, rich in copper and strategically positioned in the eastern Mediterranean, became a premier workshop for this kind of creative synthesis. Cypriot potters were famous for their adaptability. They might take the elegant, floral lotus motif, a symbol of rebirth deeply associated with Egypt, and combine it with the dynamic, running spiral border favored by Mycenaean Greek artisans. Fired onto a single, beautiful vase, this hybrid design was no longer purely Egyptian or purely Mycenaean. It was something new, a distinctly Cypriot product that spoke the visual languages of all its trading partners. This vase, then, was more than a container. It was a testament to a connected world, a physical embodiment of the conversations happening on docks and in harbors. The Mediterranean did not simply transport finished artworks, it facilitated the exchange of the artistic grammar itself. A ship captain might not understand the deep religious significance of the symbols he carried, but he understood their value. In this aqueous marketplace of ideas, the most compelling, beautiful, and powerful designs had the highest currency. They were the ones most likely to be copied, adapted, and sent sailing again on the next tide, weaving the coastal civilizations into a single, intricate tapestry of shared thought. But the sea was only half the story. While ships traced the southern edges of continents, a different kind of highway stretched across the north, a boundless sea of grass known as the Eurasian steppe. This was the land's answer to the Mediterranean, a continental corridor so vast it connected the fringes of Europe with the borders of China. Here, the couriers were not sailors but horsemen, the nomadic and semi-nomadic cultures whose lives were a perpetual journey. Groups like the Andronovo in the east and the Asrubnaya in the west did not build palaces or carve grand seals. Their legacy was written in motion, and they became the indispensable intermediaries between the great sedentary empires. These mobile communities were the original overland network, transporting far more than goods. They carried the very grammar of Bronze Age symbolism across the roof of the world. Their most revolutionary export was not a symbol itself, but the technology that would redefine power and warfare, the chariot. This lightweight, horse-drawn vehicle was the fighter jet of its day, a platform of terrifying speed and tactical advantage. But the chariot never traveled alone. With it came an entire package of associated iconography, a visual language of elite status, divine favor, and martial prowess. The sun disk, already a widespread symbol, became fused with the chariot, representing the solar chariot of the gods racing across the heavens. Images of chariots themselves, often pulled by stylized horses, began to appear on stone stelae and in burial sites across the steppe, marking the graves of those who commanded this prestigious technology. The diffusion of the chariot from its likely origins in the steppe regions into Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mycenaean world was not just a transfer of machinery. It was the delivery of a complete social and symbolic system, one that reshaped how kings projected their authority and how artists depicted cosmic power. Perhaps the most distinctive artistic contribution flowing along these grassy highways was the so-called animal style. This was an art in perfect harmony with a nomadic life. It was portable, durable, and designed for personal adornment or weapon decoration. Imagine a bronze belt plaque or a golden comb, not with serene portraits or geometric patterns, but with a scene of pure, coiled tension. A predator, often a snow leopard or an eagle, locks its jaws onto the neck of a majestic stag, or two griffins locked in an eternal, stylized combat. This was not a random depiction of nature. It was a highly formalized, symbolic art where every twist of a body and every curl of a tail carried meaning. The animals were often contorted into impossible, interlaced poses, their bodies dissolving into rhythmic, decorative patterns that emphasized motion and conflict over realistic anatomy. This animal-style art became a visual dialect spoken from the borders of Siberia to the plains of Eastern Europe. Its energy was infectious. As steppe nomads traded with settled communities on their borders, this vibrant, dynamic aesthetic began to seep into the artistic traditions of those more stationary cultures. A Mycenaean dagger found in Greece, its blade inlaid with a stunning scene of lions hunting antelope in a rocky landscape, echoes the predatory themes of the steppe, though executed with a more naturalistic flair. The fierce, stylized beasts that guard the edges of later Scythian gold work, a culture descended from these early steppe traditions, feel like a direct evolution of this ancient artistic language. The motifs flowed like the herds across the grasslands, adaptable and enduring. These nomadic intermediaries remind us that the map of Bronze Age connection was not defined solely by the glittering ports of the Mediterranean. It had a northern twin, a land of wind and riders where ideas moved at the pace of a galloping horse. The steppe was not a void between empires, but a vibrant, creative heartland in its own right, a crucible where symbols were forged in a different fire, one of mobility and the intimate, daily relationship between human and animal. The art that traveled these routes carried the spirit of the open sky, the tension of the hunt, and the raw, untamed energy of the wilderness, offering a powerful counterpoint to the more formal, hierarchical iconography of the palace and the temple, and proving that the conversation of the Bronze Age was as rich and varied on land as it was on the sea. So we are left with a world woven together by shared symbols, but a critical question hangs in the air. Are we looking at a single, connected tapestry, or many separate weavers who just happen to choose the same threads? This is the great debate between independent invention and cultural diffusion, a puzzle at the very heart of understanding our ancient past. On one side stands the idea of psychic unity, a concept from early anthropology. It proposes that all human minds, regardless of geography or culture, are wired with the same fundamental cognitive tools, faced with the same universal experiences: the rising and setting sun, the terrifying power of a storm, the mystery of death and birth. Our ancestors would naturally reach for similar metaphors. The spiral, in this view, is almost inevitable. Anyone who watches water swirl down a drain, sees a coiled fern unfurl, or traces the path of the stars might independently arrive at that elegant, turning line as a symbol for cyclical forces. It is a beautiful argument for a shared human imagination, suggesting that great minds think alike even when separated by continents. Yet the opposing view, cultural diffusion, points to the physical evidence on the ground. It argues that humans are also incredible mimics and borrowers, and that ideas, like goods, travel along established routes. This is not about proving that one culture copied another, but that they were in conversation. The diffusionist looks at a map of Bronze Age trade, with its tin routes and lapis lazuli trails, and asks a simple question. If a merchant could carry a sack of precious stones across 3,000 miles, why could he not also carry a story, a design, or a religious concept tucked away in his memory? The artifacts themselves seem to whisper of these journeys. The presence of Indus Valley carnelian beads in Mesopotamian royal graves is not a theory, it is a fact documented by archaeology. Where luxury goods traveled, ideas surely followed in their wake. Perhaps no symbol illustrates this debate more starkly than the swastika. Its name comes from the ancient Sanskrit word for well-being, and its form is deceptively simple: a cross with arms bent at right angles, spinning in a perpetual motion. We find it incised on pottery from ancient Troy, stamped on seals from the Indus Valley city of Mohenjo-Daro, and carved into stone monuments across prehistoric Europe, long before its tragic appropriation in the 20th century. Its widespread appearance presents the perfect case study. Could this specific, complex geometric shape have sprung up independently in India, Anatolia, and Scandinavia? Proponents of independent invention might say yes, pointing to its basic structure as a stylized representation of rotation, perhaps of the sun or a swirling fire drill. It solves a visual problem: how to depict dynamic motion in a static symbol, and many minds could have arrived at that same solution. However, the diffusionist examines the context and the timeline. The swastika does not appear randomly across the globe at random times. Its earliest known appearances cluster in the Eurasian landmass during the Neolithic and Bronze Age, periods when we know trade networks were expanding. It is frequently found on objects associated with prestige or ritual, like seals and fine pottery, the very items most likely to travel and be admired. Furthermore, its meaning, where we can decipher it, often revolves around auspiciousness, good fortune, and solar power, a remarkably consistent theme. This pattern of association suggests it was not just a decorative doodle, but a packaged concept, a symbol loaded with a specific wish for prosperity. That kind of complex, meaning-laden icon is less likely to be independently invented in identical form over and over. It is more like a catchy melody that, once heard, is hard to forget and easy to pass along. The swastika's journey, whether through the slow creep of cultural contact along the steppe routes or through more direct trade, demonstrates how a powerful idea can find a home in vastly different societies, each adapting it to fit their own spiritual landscape while retaining its core essence of turning, of cyclical blessing. The truth, as it often is, likely lies in the middle ground, the human mind does have a universal grammar, which is why so many cultures revered the sun or feared serpents. But that innate grammar was given its specific vocabulary through contact and exchange. A spiral might be a natural human thought, but the particular way it was integrated into a palace facade or combined with other symbols on a seal could easily have been influenced by seeing a foreign artifact. In the pre-literate world, before maps and encyclopedias, an object was its own best ambassador. A single, beautifully cast bronze axe featuring a master of animals motif could plant that entire compositional idea in a new region where local artists would then make it their own. This was not passive copying but active, creative reinterpretation. The debate, then, is not about choosing one explanation over the other, but about understanding the beautiful interplay between the shared hardware of the human brain and the endless, connecting software of human interaction. Our ancestors were both brilliant, independent inventors and avid, curious collectors of the world's ideas, and their shared symbols are the magnificent legacy of that dual nature. That same swastika carved into ancient stone wood millennia later become one of history's most chilling examples of symbolic theft. Its journey from a sign of blessing to an emblem of hatred is a stark lesson in how meaning is never inherent in a shape, but is poured into it by the hands of history. To understand its original power, we must look to a time long before its modern distortion, to its earliest appearances in the very civilizations we have been tracing. On the soapstone seals of the Indus Valley city of Mohenjo-Daro, the swastika appears clearly, often alongside animals and ritual objects. For the people of that sophisticated urban culture, its spinning arms likely evoked motion, the turning of the cosmic wheel, a wish for prosperity and good fortune embedded into the very stamp of authority. Thousands of miles to the west, on pottery fragments from ancient Troy in Anatolia, the same symbol is painted in bold, geometric lines. Here, it may have been a solar emblem, a simplified depiction of a spinning sun disk bringing life to the fields. Further north still, in the metalwork and carvings of early Norse and Germanic tribes, the symbol, sometimes called the sun wheel or the hammer of Thor, represented protection, strength, and the cyclical power of the seasons. In Buddhist traditions that would later spread across Asia, the swastika, drawn in the opposite rotational direction, adorned temple gates and statues, representing the eternal footsteps of the Buddha, a map of a harmonious and enlightened mind. For thousands of years across countless cultures, this simple geometric shape carried a remarkably consistent message of positivity, an ancient and shared hope for good things turning in one's favor. Its near simultaneous emergence in such distant lands makes it a fascinating puzzle. Did the human mind, contemplating the spinning of a fire drill or the arc of the sun, simply arrive at this elegant solution independently, time and again? Or did the symbol, once invented in one region, begin an incredibly slow migration along those early trade routes, its compelling form and auspicious meaning making it a welcome guest in each new community it entered? The evidence suggests a blend of both, a testament to its fundamental, almost intuitive resonance. The swastika worked because it visually solved a universal human observation, the power of cyclical motion. Yet its precise, identical form appearing in specific archaeological contexts also hints at the possibility of contact, of a good idea being passed along and cherished. This deep, cross-continental history makes its 20th century transformation all the more profound and tragic. In the early 1900s, the symbol still retained its ancient, benign meaning in the West, often used in architecture and advertising as a token of good luck. But this very antiquity and vague mystical association is what drew the attention of nationalist groups in Europe seeking a powerful, pre-Christian emblem for their ideology. They deliberately extracted the swastika from its global context of well-being and forcibly poured into it a new meaning, one of racial purity and violent supremacy. The symbol was rotated, stylized, and placed against a stark red and white background, becoming a logo for a political movement built on exclusion and conquest. In a few short decades, through immense historical trauma, the weight of this new association crushed millennia of diverse and peaceful meaning. The swastika's story is perhaps the ultimate cautionary tale in the study of symbols. It demonstrates that no design is safe forever, that its power lies entirely in the story we tell about it. A shape that once wished for life and light was harnessed to represent death and darkness. This radical reinterpretation shows us that the connections we have been exploring across the Bronze Age were not just about the transfer of forms, but about the fragile, living meanings those forms carried. A spiral could mean regeneration, a bull could mean sacred strength, and a turning cross could mean the sun's blessing, but only as long as the culture that used them agreed on that story. When a new story, backed by terrible force, takes over, the symbol itself seems to change, revealing that its true home is not in the artifact, but in the human heart and mind that interprets it. This fluidity is both a vulnerability and a source of hope. It means that while meaning can be stolen, it can also, with time and conscious effort, be understood anew, its layers of history once again brought to light. The impulse to build upward, to carve a human mark against the limitless sky, may be the most profound symbol of all. When we look past the portable artifacts and the small seals to the very bones of the landscape, we find the same conversations written in stone, on a scale so massive it defies simple explanation. From the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to the dense rainforests of Central America, cultures that could never have known of each other's existence raised eerily similar monuments to the heavens. The Ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia and the stepped pyramids of the Maya and Aztec civilizations stand as the most compelling architectural echo across time and space. Both are essentially artificial mountains, built with a series of receding tiers or steps that ascend towards a summit. For the Mesopotamians, the ziggurat was a literal stairway to the gods, a holy high place where priests could perform rituals closer to the divine realm. The great ziggurat of dedicated to the moon god Nana, was a towering beacon of baked brick, its sides converging upwards as a geometric prayer. Thousands of miles away and thousands of years later, the builders of Teotihuacan or Chichen Itza constructed their pyramids with the same essential vision, a man-made mountain where the human and celestial worlds met. At the summit of a Mesoamerican pyramid, often a temple where ceremonies were held, the priest-king would literally stand above the world, mediating between his people and the gods of sun and rain. This parallel is not about shared blueprints, but about a shared human dilemma, how to physically reach towards the incomprehensible power of the cosmos. The pyramidal form, stable, imposing, and pointing unmistakably upward, became the default architectural solution for that spiritual longing, a collective answer to a universal question. While some looked to the sky, others sought to map it onto the earth. Across the rolling hills of Western Europe, from Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain to the countless stone circles scattered across Britain and Brittany, a different kind of sacred geometry took shape. These were not mountains but compasses, colossal rings and alignments of standing stones that turned the landscape itself into an observatory and a calendar. The construction of these megalithic sites, like Newgrange in Ireland or the Carnac stones in France, required a staggering communal effort, moving and erecting stones that weighed tons with nothing but muscle, rope, and ingenuity. Their purpose seems consistently tied to the cycles of the heavens. The central axis of Newgrange's passage tomb is aligned so that on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, a narrow beam of sunlight pierces the dark interior for just 17 minutes, illuminating the chamber in a dramatic symbol of the sun's rebirth. Stonehenge's famous heel stone marks the summer solstice sunrise. This drive to anchor massive, permanent stones to the precise movements of the sun and moon was not confined to Europe. On the other side of the world, at sites like Nabta Playa in the Sahara, which predates the Egyptian pyramids, we find stone circles that also appear to have astronomical alignments. Even in what is now the southwestern United States, ancestral puebloan structures exhibit careful orientations to solar and lunar events. This recurring pattern, the celestial observatory built in stone, speaks to a profound and widespread human realization that human time, the seasons for planting and harvest, was governed by celestial time. To build a monument that captured that relationship was to assert a measure of understanding and perhaps control over the very forces of life and survival. The sheer impossibility of direct contact between the pyramid builders of Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica, or the stone circle architects of Europe and prehistoric Africa, forces us to confront a powerful idea: the concept of psychic unity or convergent evolution in culture. Just as biologists find that unrelated species in similar environments often evolve similar traits, like the wings of birds and bats, historians and archaeologists see that human societies facing similar spiritual and practical challenges often arrive at similar solutions. The pyramid form is structurally logical, a stable way to build tall with primitive materials. The circle is a fundamental shape of equality and enclosure, and aligning a structure with the solstice sun requires only patient, long-term observation, not advanced technology. These forms emerged independently because they are excellent, perhaps even optimal, answers to universal human needs, to reach for the divine, to commune with the cosmos, and to create a permanent, awe-inspiring center for communal identity. Yet, even within this framework of independent invention, the scale of the parallels is breathtaking. It suggests that the leap from observing the sky to monumentalizing that relationship in stone is a threshold many human cultures were destined to cross once they reached a certain level of social organization and shared belief. These architectural echoes are not copies, but variations on a theme written by the human condition itself, a theme of seeking order in the vastness above and leaving a mark of that understanding for eternity, in the most enduring language we possess, the language of stone. Yet the grandest monuments could not contain the entire conversation. For that, we must turn to the most humble and eloquent of artifacts, the clay pot. Ceramics are the quiet chroniclers of the ancient world, fragile yet enduring, broken into pieces that whisper of daily meals, sacred offerings, and the silent trade in ideas. Every pot carried a dual purpose. It was a container for grain, oil, or wine, and simultaneously, a canvas for the identity and beliefs of its maker. When a beautifully decorated vessel traveled, it did not travel empty. It carried its contents, and it carried the entire aesthetic worldview of its culture stamped, painted, or incised upon its surface. The spread of specific pottery styles becomes one of archaeology's most reliable maps for tracing the movement of people and the osmosis of thought. Consider the Bell beaker culture, which emerged around 2800 before Common Era. Its namesake artifact is a distinctive, elegant drinking cup with a flared rim, often decorated with bands of geometric patterns pressed into the clay before firing. These beakers did not stay in one place. They are found in graves and settlements from the Iberian Peninsula across Central Europe and into the British Isles. This was not a fashion trend spreading by mail order. The widespread distribution of such a specific, finely made object type suggests something significant: the movement of groups of people, perhaps skilled artisans or traders, who carried with them not just the beakers, but the social practices and rituals that required them. Where the beakers appear, a whole package of cultural attributes, including specific burial customs and metalworking techniques, often follows. This was an idea traveling in the form of a cup, a shared symbol of status and community that allowed distant peoples to recognize a commonality, a shared way of doing things that transcended local dialects. In the vibrant world of the Bronze Age Aegean, the dialogue between cultures is painted in brilliant color on pottery walls. The Minoans of Crete were master ceramicists, producing vessels adorned with fluid, naturalistic scenes of octopuses, dolphins, and lilies, all rendered in a graceful, swirling style that seems to capture the motion of the sea itself. When the Mycenaean civilization on the Greek mainland grew in power and influence, it did not ignore this beautiful artistic language. Instead, it began a profound process of adoption and adaptation. Mycenaean potters started to produce their own versions of classic Minoan shapes, like the tall, slender stirrup jar used for storing precious oils. They also borrowed decorative motifs, but they often translated them into a style that suited their own tastes. The playful Minoan octopus might become more stylized, its tentacles forming a rigid, symmetrical pattern. The organic lily might be simplified into a repeating, formalized border. This was not mere copying, it was a conversation in clay. The Mycenaeans were taking the vocabulary of Minoan art, a vocabulary associated with sophistication, maritime power, and divine favor, and they were using it to articulate their own growing authority. By analyzing these potsherds, archaeologists can trace the subtle routes of this influence. They can see which motifs were adopted first, which ones were changed, and how the blend of styles created something entirely new. A Mycenaean ceramic tradition that was both indebted to and distinct from its Minoan inspiration. Even the most common design elements tell a story. The consistent use of marine life motifs across the Aegean points to a shared reverence for and dependence on the sea, a universal experience that found similar artistic expression. A specific border pattern, like the running spiral or the precise meander, might appear on a pot in a Cretan palace workshop, and a generation later, on a jar from a mainland Greek village. This pattern's journey maps a route of interaction, perhaps through a marriage alliance, a gift from one ruler to another, or the travels of a single skilled potter seeking work in a new land. These everyday objects, often mass-produced for daily use, became the most effective carriers of a shared visual language. A farmer bartering for a painted jar from a foreign trader might not understand the political symbolism, but he would absorb its beauty and its foreignness, normalizing that design in his own community. In this way, the humble ceramic vessel did more than hold supplies. It served as a durable, disposable pamphlet for an entire cultural aesthetic, spreading the grammar of symbols one broken piece at a time, proving that the deepest connections are often found not in gold or stone, but in the baked earth of a common pot. But these symbols did not just decorate objects or monuments, they began to speak. Long before the streamlined letters of the alphabet, humanity's first attempts to record language looked remarkably like art galleries in miniature. In the sun-baked temples of Egypt, the walls were alive with a beautiful and baffling script, hieroglyphs. These were not mere pictures of birds, snakes, and eyes. Each elegant glyph could function as a straightforward depiction, a symbol for a related idea or even a sound. A drawing of an owl might mean the bird itself, or it might stand for the consonant sound M. A wavy line could represent water or the concept of chaos. This was a system where the line between a sacred symbol and a written word was beautifully, intentionally blurred. The Egyptians understood the immense power of the image, believing that to write or carve a thing was to make it real, to give it a kind of eternal life. So their writing was not just communication, it was an act of creation, a magical art where every drawn serpent and every carved lotus held multiple layers of potent meaning. Far to the east, on the small stone seals of the Indus Valley, we encounter a different but related mystery. The script etched above the iconic humped bull remains undeciphered to this day. We can see it is a system with recurring signs and combinations, but we cannot hear its voice. Many of its characters are starkly geometric, but others are clearly representational, little sketches of fish, of men, of what look like jars or plants. This suggests that, like the hieroglyphs, the Indus script likely began with pictographs, simple drawings that over time became stylized and assigned specific meanings or sounds. The seal itself was a functional object used to mark property, but the script upon it elevated that function into a statement of identity and authority, merging administrative utility with symbolic art. Across these early systems, we find a fascinating repetition of core graphic ideas. The symbol of an eye, for instance, appears again and again. In Egypt, the Eye of Horus was a definitive emblem of protection, royal power, and good health. A similar, watchful eye appears on amulets and seals from Anatolia and the Aegean, often interpreted as an apotropaic device, something to ward off misfortune. The human hand is another universal graphic unit. It could symbolize action, offering, power, or blessing. In cuneiform, the earliest writing from Mesopotamia, the sign for hand was one of the basic building blocks, used to form words related to giving, taking, and holding. This reuse tells us something profound. Before cultures developed complex grammatical rules, they shared a basic visual vocabulary for the most fundamental human experiences: sight, touch, action, protection. These were the conceptual atoms from which both art and writing were built. A trader from Mesopotamia might not have understood an Egyptian hieroglyphic inscription, but if he saw a carved eye on a temple wall, he would likely have understood its protective intent. This shared symbolic substrate made the exchange of more complex ideas possible. The interplay reveals that writing did not suddenly appear as a practical tool for accounting, though that was one of its first uses. It evolved naturally from the symbolic design language that already blanketed the Bronze Age world. The spiral that meant eternity, the bull that meant divine strength, the eye that meant watchful care, these were the prototypes. They were images loaded with so much agreed upon meaning that they became ripe for standardization, for being linked together to tell a sequence, a story, a record. The act of writing began as an act of curation, selecting the most powerful, resonant symbols and arranging them in a line to guide the reader through a thought. In this light, the undeciphered Indus script is not a locked door but a silent symphony. We may not know the words, but we can recognize the instruments, the familiar shapes of a visual language that the whole ancient world was learning to speak. This was the great transition, the moment when symbolic art, the shared currency of cross-continental connection, began to crystallize into the first true sentences, setting humanity on the path to preserving not just objects and monuments, but the very flow of thought itself. The silent language of symbols found its loudest voice in the hands of a king. When a ruler raised a ceremonial mace, its heavy stone head poised to strike, the message was understood from the Nile to the Euphrates. This was not a weapon for battle, but a tool of theater, a perfect symbol of sanctioned force. The act of smiting an enemy, eternally captured in Egyptian reliefs and Mesopotamian stelae, was a ritual performance. It depicted the monarch not as a mere soldier, but as the earthly executor of divine will, crushing chaos itself on behalf of the gods. The mace, the scepter, the crook and flail, these were the universal props in a shared drama of sovereignty. Their consistent use tells us that the very concept of sacred kingship was a packaged idea, traveling along diplomatic channels and trade routes, with each culture adapting the costume to fit its local deities. Perhaps the most striking shared costume piece was the horned crown. In Mesopotamia, gods and deified kings were depicted wearing headdresses embedded with multiple pairs of bull horns, a direct symbol of superhuman, divine power borrowed from the sacred animal. This iconography of horned authority did not stay within one river valley. We see echoes of it in the horned helmets of Aegean warrior gods on seal rings, and centuries later, in the ritual headgear of European priests. The horn became an international badge of the numinous, a quick visual shorthand to signal that the wearer operated in a realm beyond the ordinary human. This was a transnational dialogue among elites, a quiet agreement on how legitimate power should look, a visual contract that helped maintain order across a fragmented world. The dialogue extended into the most sacred spaces of all, the temples. Here, ritual vessels were not simple containers, they were portals. A libation cup shaped like a roaring lion, found in a Hittite shrine, served the same fundamental purpose as a bull-shaped rhyton from Mycenaean Greece or an elaborate ceremonial wine vessel from ancient China. When a priest poured an offering from such a vessel, he was not just giving wine to the gods, he was channeling it through the embodied spirit of the mightiest creature they knew. The vessel's form activated its function, turning a simple liquid into a divine gift delivered by a sacred intermediary. Similarly, cosmological scenes engraved on cult objects, from Babylonian boundary stones to the inner lids of Egyptian sarcophagi, served as maps of the universe. They oriented the ritual within the entire cosmic order, asserting that the ceremony performed in this small temple was a vital event keeping the sun on its path and the stars in their places. These objects were active participants, not passive decorations. A scepter wielded in a certain way, a crown placed on a specific brow, a libation poured from a particular beast. These actions, guided by symbolic objects, were believed to have real metaphysical consequences. They maintained the covenant between heaven and earth. The stunning similarity in this ritual toolkit, therefore, is more than an artistic coincidence. It hints at a deep, shared understanding of how to mediate the sacred, a common manual for maintaining the balance of the world. When a new dynasty rose to power in a distant land, its artisans might look to the regalia of established empires, not to copy, but to learn the visual grammar of legitimacy. In adopting and adapting the horned crown or the ceremonial vessel, they were tapping into a pre-existing cross-cultural language of authority, one that their subjects, and perhaps their gods, were already primed to understand. The sky was not just a spectacle, it was the ultimate instruction manual. For Bronze Age farmers, priests, and kings, the precise rhythm of the stars dictated when to plant, when to harvest, and when to offer prayers for the coming rain. This universal dependence on celestial cycles did more than create calendars. It imprinted the patterns of the heavens directly onto the symbols and stones of the earth, weaving a final, profound layer into this cross-continental language. Look at a Mesopotamian boundary stone or kudaru. These were legal documents carved in stone marking the grant of land by the king, but they are also cosmic maps. Alongside inscriptions, they are carved with rows of symbols arranged in tiers representing the major gods, and consistently, you will find a crescent for the moon god Sin, a star or sun disk for the sun god Shamash, and a stylized star for the goddess Ishtar, associated with the planet Venus. This was not mere decoration. Placing these celestial emblems on a property marker was a powerful act. It invoked the eternal, watching gods as witnesses to the earthly transaction, anchoring a field or an orchard under the perpetual jurisdiction of the cosmos. The arrangement itself often mirrored the perceived hierarchy of the heavens, a direct transfer of celestial order onto the very soil. This deep integration of astronomy into daily life meant that when myths traveled, they often carried star maps within them. The epic tales of gods and heroes that circulated along trade routes were frequently explanations for the movements of planets and the shapes of constellations. A story about a great hunter pursuing a bull across the sky, found in one form or another from Mesopotamia to Greece, provided a memorable narrative for the constellations we call Orion and Taurus. When the story was told, the star pattern was taught. When the story traveled, that specific celestial reference point traveled with it, creating a shared way of seeing the same scatter of stars. This celestial influence shaped the very bones of the landscape. The orientation of tombs was rarely random. Across cultures, from the passage graves of Ireland to the mastabas of Egypt, entranceways were frequently aligned to the rising sun of the solstice or to a significant star. This was a final, powerful statement of belief that the journey after life was a return to the cosmic cycle, a reintegration with the eternal rhythms first observed in the sky above. Even the layouts of cities sometimes reflected this cosmic order. The meticulous street grid of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, while practical, may also have embodied a concept of earthly order mirroring celestial harmony. The great ceremonial center of Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica, built much later but following the same human impulse, was precisely aligned to the Pleiades star cluster. This shared practice of celestial alignment reveals a universal logic. If you build your most important structures in concert with the heavens, you ensure their permanence and sanctity within the grand, turning scheme of the universe. One of the most widespread celestial symbols to emerge from this shared gaze was the star and crescent motif. We see it on the standards of Mesopotamian deities. It appears on coins and seals from Central Asia, and it becomes a defining emblem for centuries in the Near East. This pairing elegantly captured the two most obvious changing lights in the night sky, the constant, punctual stars and the ever-shifting, cyclical moon. It was a compact symbol for the totality of the night heavens, for timekeeping, and for the divine forces that governed fate. Its appearance across such a wide geography is a testament to the common observational experience. Anyone who spent nights outdoors, whether a shepherd on the Anatolian plateau or a sailor on the Red Sea, would recognize the intimate dance of the moon past the fixed stars. To distill that observation into a single, elegant emblem was a logical step for many cultures, and once created, its potent simplicity made it an ideal traveler along trade routes, easily copied and infused with local meaning. This collective attunement to the sky created a silent, non-verbal bond. A priest in Egypt tracking the heliacal rising of Sirius to predict the Nile flood, and a stone circle builder in Britain marking the midwinter sunset, were engaged in the same fundamental project, using careful observation to secure their people's survival. While they would never meet, their efforts generated similar symbolic outputs: reverence for solar disks, attention to lunar phases, and the veneration of specific star groups. They were all reading the same grand text written in light, and though they might translate the paragraphs differently, the chapters they focused on, the solstices, the equinoxes, the wandering planets, were remarkably consistent. This shared celestial focus provided a universal clock and a universal map against which every culture could plot its own unique story, yet feel connected to a rhythm that pulsed across the entire ancient world. A lion's powerful body meets the piercing gaze and sweeping wings of an eagle. This magnificent fusion, the Griffin, did not simply appear in one land. It was a traveler, an idea assembled from the world's most potent symbols, and then sent on a journey across continents. Its story begins in the ancient Near East and the river valleys of Egypt, where early artists first experimented with combining the attributes of different creatures to express power that surpassed the natural world. These early forms were not yet the classic griffin we recognize, but they were searching for the same concept, a being that ruled both the earth and the sky. We see lion-bodied creatures with falcon heads in Egyptian art, guardians associated with the pharaoh's might. In Mesopotamia, protective spirits often blended human, avian, and leonine features. The griffin, as a specific and enduring composite, seems to have crystallized from this creative milieu, becoming a standardized emblem of ultimate, watchful strength. Its primary role in these early appearances was often that of a sentinel. It was depicted in palace reliefs and on cylinder seals, standing vigilant, a permanent deterrent against any threat, physical or spiritual. But the Griffin was destined for a much longer voyage, one that would take it over the sea to a new home. The Minoan civilization of Crete, with its thriving palaces and far-reaching trade networks, enthusiastically adopted this powerful symbol. In the intricate frescoes of Knossos, the Griffin undergoes a subtle transformation. It is often shown in more dynamic, graceful poses, its feathers rendered with the flowing, naturalistic style that Minoan artists loved. Here, it appears in sacred contexts, sometimes alongside the goddess or in processional scenes, suggesting it was not merely a god but a companion to the divine. The famous throne room at Knossos features magnificent griffins flanking the ceremonial seat, their presence sanctifying the ruler's authority, directly channeling that Near Eastern idea of the creature as a legitimizing force. Yet the Griffin also acquired a very specific, practical legend in the Aegean world. Later Greek writers like Herodotus would tell tales of griffins dwelling in the distant, gold-rich mountains of the north, fiercely guarding their hoards from human miners. This fascinating story, whether born from merchants' tales or poetic imagination, attached a new layer of meaning to the creature. It became not just a general guardian, but specifically a guardian of precious metal, a myth that may explain its frequent appearance in the treasure-laden palaces of the Mycenaeans who succeeded the Minoan. The Mycenaeans, in turn, made the Griffin their own. They translated it into their own artistic language, which favored bold, stylized forms and a love for martial symbolism. On gold funeral masks, inlaid dagger blades, and the frescoes of their fortified citadels, the Mycenaean Griffin stands with a more rigid, heraldic posture. Its wings are often patterned, its body more geometric, fitting seamlessly into the decorative schemes of shields and armor. This stylistic evolution is the key to understanding its journey. The core idea, the fusion of the king of beasts and the king of birds to create a supreme guardian, remained perfectly intact, but its artistic execution shifted with each new culture that welcomed it. The Near Eastern Griffin might look more formal and symbolic, the Minoan version more lively and integrated into nature, the Mycenaean iteration more abstract and militaristic. Each culture poured the same conceptual power into a vessel of its own design. This creature's cross-continental path demonstrates how a complex symbol could be borrowed not as a shallow copy, but as a profound template. It offered a pre-made solution to a universal need, the need for an image that represented absolute hybrid authority. A Mycenaean goldsmith engraving a griffin on a seal was connecting his king to an ancient, international language of power, one that stretched back to the very origins of civilization. The griffin's wings carried more than just a mythical beast. They carried a complete idea about the nature of protection and sovereignty, an idea that proved adaptable enough to find a sacred perch in palaces thousands of miles and hundreds of years apart. The softest and most transient of all these ancient conversations was woven from threads. While stone and bronze endure, the vibrant textiles of the Bronze Age have almost entirely vanished, returning to dust. Yet their ghostly imprint remains, pressed into the damp clay of unfired pottery, or painted in meticulous detail on the walls of tombs and palaces. These faint shadows reveal a forgotten canvas, one that draped every person from farmer to pharaoh in a moving tapestry of symbols. The patterns woven into cloth were not mere decoration, they were a dynamic, wearable language. A complex checkerboard might denote a specific clan or region. A border of interlocking lozenges could signal marital status, and a repeating motif of stylized birds might be a prayer for protection woven right into the fabric of a shawl. In an age before mass media, what you wore literally told your story to the world, with every color and geometric repeat acting as a silent, personal heraldry. This makes the loss of these textiles so poignant, but the evidence of their exchange is compelling. on a clay pot left to dry in a sunlit courtyard, a basket might have been set down, or a roll of cloth might have been laid across its rim. The texture of the weave, a tight herringbone or a delicate net pattern, was accidentally preserved as a negative impression in the hardened clay. Archaeologists find these impressions and can reconstruct the thread count and the sophistication of the loom that made it. More directly, the frescoes of Minoan Crete show women in elaborate, flounced skirts adorned with bands of intricate designs, spirals, and abstract flowers. The famous procession fresco from Knossos is a fashion parade of symbolic cloth, each pattern potentially carrying meaning about the wearer's role in the ceremony. How did these patterns travel? The technology itself was portable. A master weaver, perhaps part of a diplomatic entourage or a family resettling along a trade route, carried her knowledge in her hands. The complex arrangement of the warp and weft on a loom, the secret to creating a specific repeating diamond pattern, was knowledge as valuable as any metalworking technique. It could be taught, shared, and adapted. Furthermore, the textiles themselves, especially those dyed with rare and expensive colors like Tyrian purple from the Mediterranean or crimson from Kerm's insects, were luxury goods of the highest order. A bolt of finely patterned cloth, gifted from one royal court to another, was a statement of wealth and technological prowess. When such a textile arrived in a foreign land, it was admired not just for its feel and color, but for its design. A local artisan, tasked with creating something of similar splendor for her own ruler, might study the foreign cloth, deciphering the pattern structure, and then replicating it with a local twist, perhaps changing the colors or blending the new motif with a traditional one. This transfer was a profound, intimate exchange. It was not about grand monuments or stamped seals, but about the code embedded in a knot, the symbolism locked in a dye recipe passed from mother to daughter. A specific way of braiding a fringe or a ceremonial pattern reserved for a priest's robe could slowly seep from one culture to another through these channels. The famous tartan-like patterns found in artifacts from the Caucasus to Central Europe suggest that the idea of using striped and checked weaves to signify group identity was widespread, a shared solution to a shared human need to belong. So while we marvel at the gold and the stone, we should also remember the whisper of the loom. The most pervasive and personal carrier of the Bronze Age's symbolic language was likely the very cloth on people's backs, a fluid, breathing art that wove the shared visual codes of spirals, animals, and geometries into the intimate fabric of daily life, making every individual a walking testament to a connected, creatively vibrant world. Around the year 1200 before Common Era, the great symphony of the Bronze Age world fell silent. Palaces burned to their foundations, trade routes dissolved into dust. The intricate networks that had carried tin, lapis lazuli, and ideas for centuries snapped like overstretched threads. This was the late Bronze Age collapse, a period of profound unraveling that saw the fall of the Hittite Empire, the decline of Egyptian power, and the destruction of Mycenaean citadels and Levantine cities. It was an age of endings marked by widespread hardship, migration, and a dramatic simplification of culture often called a dark age. Yet within this chaos lies a profound paradox. The very forces that shattered these civilizations may have acted as a final, violent catalyst for the very symbolic exchange we have been tracing. When kingdoms crumble, their people do not simply vanish. They move. Imagine a master fresco painter from a burning Mycenaean palace, gathering his family and a few precious tools, a skilled metalsmith from a sacked city in Anatolia, fleeing with the knowledge of sacred motifs locked in his memory. These were not just refugees, they were living libraries of cultural expression. As populations scattered, these displaced artisans carried their entire symbolic repertoires with them, not on ships of trade, but on desperate journeys of survival. They sought refuge wherever safety could be found, often in smaller, less affected communities or in the rising power centers on the periphery of the old world. In these new homes, necessity became the mother of reinvention. A potter from one tradition might have to work with the local clay and pigments of another. A jeweler might blend the stylized animal forms of his homeland with the geometric preferences of his new neighbors simply to make his work appealing, to earn a living. This was not a polite exchange between courts, but a gritty, practical fusion born from shared crisis. We see the evidence of this in the archaeological record of the period following the collapse. The grand, complex art styles of the palace workshops disappear. The exquisite inlaid daggers, the elaborate fresco cycles, the finely carved seal stones give way to simpler, more utilitarian forms. Yet within this apparent decline, we find fascinating hybrids. In Cyprus, an island that weathered the storm better than most pottery styles from the Aegean, the Levant, and local traditions begin to merge on single vessels. The designs become less refined but more eclectic. It is as if the old rulebooks were lost and artisans, drawing from multiple, broken sources, began writing new ones together. In the Philistine settlements along the coast of Canaan, a people possibly of Aegean origin, we find pottery that clearly combines Mycenaean shapes and decorative motifs with Egyptian and local Canaanite influences. Their cult objects show a similar blend, creating a new, distinct visual identity forged in the crucible of displacement. This period of fragmentation, therefore, might be seen not as an end but as a violent reset. The highly controlled, elite-driven diffusion of symbols along royal trade routes was over. In its place came a more democratic, chaotic, and intimate form of exchange. Symbols were no longer just gifts between kings or marks on traded goods. They were the cherished cultural baggage of whole communities on the move. The spiral that once adorned a prince's seal might now be scratched onto a simple clay loom weight in a highland village by a woman trying to preserve a memory of home. The image of a protective deity might be simplified and redrawn on a humble amulet, its power now invoked for personal safety in an uncertain world. The Great Collapse did not erase the shared symbolic language of the Bronze Age. It shattered it into 1,000 pieces and scattered them across the landscape. In the quiet centuries that followed, often called the Greek Dark Ages, people slowly picked up those pieces, but they rarely found just one fragment from a single source. They found pieces from different puzzles, from different palaces and different shores, and as they began to rebuild, they started fitting them together in new combinations. The simplified, geometric styles of this era are often a melting pot, where the core ideas of the sun disk, the sacred animal, and the protective spiral were stripped of their elaborate courtly context and reduced to their most essential, powerful forms. These forms were durable. They survived the collapse because they spoke to fundamental human needs for protection, for meaning, for connection to the cycles of nature. And in their simplified state, they were more portable, more adaptable, and more ready to be woven into the fabric of the new world that was slowly emerging, the world of the Iron Age. So the darkness was not empty, it was a workshop, a difficult, painful workshop where the inherited symbols of a fallen world were broken down, blended, and prepared to become the foundational vocabulary for the next great chapter of human civilization. But how do we move beyond the compelling story and into the realm of verifiable fact? The romance of ancient connections meets its ultimate test in the modern laboratory. Today, archaeologists are no longer reliant on stylistic hunches alone. They wield a suite of scientific tools that act like a forensic scanner for the past, peeling back the layers of time to reveal the hard data of how these symbols actually move. This is where the poetry of the spiral meets the precision of the particle accelerator. One of the most powerful techniques is provenance analysis. Every material, from the clay of a pot to the tin in a bronze ingot, carries a unique chemical fingerprint, a subtle signature of the geology from which it was born. By using methods like neutron activation analysis or lead isotope analysis, scientists can take a tiny sample from an artifact and match its elemental profile to specific ore deposits or clay sources across the globe. Imagine a beautifully cast bronze axe found in a Mycenaean tomb. Through provenance analysis, researchers can determine that the copper came from Cyprus, while the tin, a rarer and more critical component, originated from a mine as far away as Cornwall in Britain or the Erzgebirge Mountains in Central Europe. Suddenly, that axe is no longer just a symbol of power. It is a detailed receipt for a transaction spanning thousands of miles, a physical map of the trade route that brought its very essence together. This data allows us to draw solid lines on the map, connecting the point of manufacture to the sources of its raw materials, and proving that objects and the ideas stamped upon them were capable of astonishing journeys. Alongside tracking materials, archaeologists use a refined eye for style through a process called seriation. This involves analyzing how design elements change over time within a specific culture. By studying hundreds of potsherds or seal impressions from a single region, researchers can create a chronological sequence, watching as a spiral motif evolves from a simple coil to an elaborate interlocking pattern, or as the depiction of a bull becomes more stylized across generations. This established local timeline becomes a crucial reference point. When a pot with a hybrid design appears, one that mixes a local style with a foreign motif, seriation helps pinpoint exactly when that cultural encounter likely happened. It tells us if the foreign symbol arrived during a period of known trade expansion or in a later era of upheaval, adding crucial context to the moment of contact. Perhaps the most transformative modern approach is the application of network theory. Instead of viewing civilizations as isolated bubbles, this framework treats them as nodes in a vast, ancient web. Researchers feed data from thousands of artifacts, their materials, styles, and find spots into sophisticated digital models. These models can then visualize the most probable pathways of exchange, highlighting which cultures were central hubs and which were peripheral connectors. They can even simulate how an idea, like a new way of drawing a sun disk, might have diffused across this network, moving from a major trading center out along established routes to smaller communities. This approach moves us from asking, "Do these two symbols look alike?" to asking, given what we know about trade in tin, the distribution of pottery styles, and settlement patterns, how likely is it that these two cultures were in a position to share this specific design? It quantifies connection, turning a suggestive visual echo into a statistically supported probability. These tools collectively bring a new, powerful rigor to the mystery. They allow us to make critical distinctions. When we find similar geometric patterns in two distant regions, science can help us decide. Was it independent invention, born from a universal human love for rhythm and order? Or is there a tangible trail, a shared source of materials, a chronological overlap in stylistic development, or a network pathway that makes direct contact not just possible but demonstrably probable? The spiral carved in Scotland and the one stamped in Pakistan may never be conclusively linked by a written document, but if the artifact-bearing one is made from a material that could only have come from a region along the other's trade network, the argument for connection gains immense strength. This scientific lens does not strip the ancient world of its wonder, it deepens it. It replaces speculation with evidence, transforming a beautiful hypothesis about a connected Bronze Age into a detailed, data-driven reconstruction, one where every shared symbol becomes a clue in the greatest detective story of all, written not in words but in the elemental language of the earth itself. Yet for every thread of connection we trace, a critical voice rightly urges caution. The vibrant tapestry of shared symbols can, if we are not careful, tempt us to see a single, uniform world where none existed. Scholarly skeptics offer essential counterpoints that deepen rather than dismiss the mystery. One of the most important critiques focuses on context. A bull depicted on a Minoan fresco, captured mid-leap, exists within a specific web of myth, ritual, and palace ceremony unique to Crete. A bull on an Indus Valley seal, standing solemnly before a ritual object, emerges from a completely different spiritual and social landscape. To assume they carried identical meaning is to ignore the profound local stories that gave these symbols their true power. The form might travel, but its soul was often remade in each new home. Similarly, the elegant spiral could represent a sun god's journey in one culture and the regenerative power of an earth goddess in another. The symbol is a vessel, and each culture pours into it its own distinct understanding of the universe. Highlighting similarity without acknowledging this profound divergence risks creating a shallow, homogenized past, stripping ancient peoples of their unique voices and the rich particularity of their beliefs. Another vital perspective cautions us against the lens of modern globalization. We live in an age of instant communication and mass media, where ideas circle the globe in seconds. To project this interconnectedness onto the Bronze Age is a form of historical distortion. For the vast majority of people living in those times, the horizon of their world was intensely local. Their concerns were the harvest, their village, and the familiar spirits of the nearby river or mountain. The grand symbols on palace walls or distant trade goods might have been as remote and irrelevant as satellite imagery is to a subsistence farmer today. The exchanges we study, while real, were likely confined to a thin, elite stratum of society, to merchants, diplomats, and royal artisans. This was not a global village, but a series of isolated towns with a few narrow bridges between them. This view reminds us that the connectedness we seek was fragile, limited, and often invisible to the everyday lives of the people who inhabited that age. These critiques are not roadblocks to understanding, they are the necessary guardrails that keep our journey honest. They help us refine the question. The goal is not to prove the existence of a single, unified Bronze Age superculture, a notion that would be as inaccurate as it is dull. Instead, it is to listen for a faint, persistent harmony within a grand symphony of difference. We are identifying threads, not a whole cloth. We are tracing whispers of conversation across a crowded, noisy room where most people are speaking in their own distinct languages. The bull may not mean the same thing in Crete and the Indus Valley, but the fact that both complex societies independently selected the bull as a primary focus for artistic investment and sacred expression is itself a monumental clue. It tells us something about shared human priorities, about the universal recognition of certain sources of power and awe. The limited, elite-driven nature of the exchange makes it more, not less, remarkable. It means that when a symbol did travel, it did so because it carried sufficient weight, beauty, or utility to be valued by those few individuals whose job it was to navigate between worlds. A single ship carrying a cargo of seals, or one displaced artisan resettling in a foreign port, could act as a potent catalyst for change, precisely because most of the world was not connected. Their influence, while narrow in scope, could ripple through a culture's artistic tradition for generations. So we are left with a dynamic and more truthful picture, a balance of powerful opposites. It is a world of both profound independence and meaningful contact. Cultures innovated in glorious isolation, developing unique answers to the human condition. Yet through cracks in the walls of that isolation, through trade routes and migrations, through the sheer human curiosity embodied in a gifted object, ideas slipped through. They were not adopted wholesale, but translated, hybridized, and integrated into existing systems of meaning. This process was slow, selective, and often superficial in terms of daily life, yet its artistic legacy is undeniable. The spiral, the sun disk, the master of animals, these forms became part of a shared reservoir of potent images, a kind of ancient visual lexicon that different cultures could draw upon and inflect with their own accent. By holding both the skepticism and the evidence in mind, we move from a simplistic narrative of copying to a more profound appreciation for the creative dialogue of the ancient world. It was a dialogue of limited means but immense consequence, where a borrowed shape could, over centuries, become the vessel for an entirely new story, weaving independent genius into the fragile, enduring web of human connection. The scattered pieces of the puzzle finally begin to align into a coherent, astonishing picture. When we synthesize the evidence from seals and ships, from bronze axes and painted pots, a clear pattern emerges from the noise of millennia. It is a pattern that respects both the brilliant independence of the human mind and the undeniable pull of connection. Yes, many of the most basic symbols, like the spiral or the simple sun, likely did spark to life in multiple places at once, born from a universal human gaze upon ferns, whirlpools, and the blazing sky. These are the shared answers to the shared questions of existence. Yet, a distinct and significant subset of this symbolic language tells a different, more intricate story. These are the complex, layered icons, the master of animals, the hybrid griffin, the horned crown of divinity, the specific ritual vessel shaped as a roaring lion. These symbols, consistently tied to elite power, intricate mythology, and the highest levels of craftsmanship, bear the subtle fingerprints of travel. Their distribution maps almost perfectly onto the known geography of Bronze Age exchange, the liquid highways of the Mediterranean, the grassy steppe corridors, and the winding riverine networks of Asia. They cluster along the very routes where tin moved, where lapis lazuli was carried, and where diplomatic envoys traveled. This is not a coincidence. It suggests a prehistoric prototype of a global network, a slow, patchy, but very real internet of ideas. In this ancient system, the symbols themselves functioned as the vital packets of data. A single cylinder seal rolling across wet clay did more than authorize a shipment. It transmitted a complete file containing a god's image, a mythic scene, and a statement of royal ideology. A bronze ingot cast with a solar emblem carried both its metallic value and its cosmic symbolism in one durable package. This exchange was not constant or evenly distributed. The network had hubs and dead ends. It flared with activity during periods of stability and fractured during times of collapse, but its existence rewrites our understanding of the age. It means a priest in Egypt could conceive of a protective spirit that shared a family resemblance with a guardian creature in Mesopotamia, not because they read the same holy book, but because their cultures were connected, however indirectly, through a chain of admirers and adapters. The symbols that moved were those that conferred power, legitimacy, or access to the sacred. They were the intellectual property of the ancient world, and they were traded, borrowed, and remixed with a sophistication that we are only now beginning to decode. This was a conversation in symbols, a dialogue conducted over centuries, where each civilization spoke in its own accent, but often discussed the same profound themes of power, cosmos, and the sacred. The pattern reveals a world far more dynamic and intellectually curious than a map of isolated kingdoms suggests, a world quietly weaving itself together through the most durable medium it had, the shared language of visual thought. The flames that consumed the Bronze Age palaces did not incinerate their symbols. Instead, they scattered the embers, and from those glowing fragments, new fires were kindled in the hearts of later civilizations. The classical world that rose from the ashes, the world of Greece, Etruria, and the Celtic North, did not start with a blank slate. It inherited a rich, pre-owned vocabulary of forms and began writing its own epic poems with them. The process was not one of simple copying, but of profound translation, taking the old, shared motifs and infusing them with new gods, new heroes, and a new spirit. In the sun-drenched sanctuaries of ancient Greece, we witness this transformation in its most celebrated form. The formidable Griffin, once a guardian of Near Eastern kings and Minoan goddesses, found a new perch on Greek soil. It became a favored decorative element on bronze cauldrons and shield bands, its stylized form now part of the artistic language of the emerging city-states. More strikingly, the entire narrative framework of Greek mythology seems to resonate with much older themes. The story of Heracles, the quintessential Greek hero, tasked with overcoming a series of monstrous challenges, feels like a direct descendant of the Near Eastern master of animals archetype. His battle with the Nemean lion is not just a feat of strength, it is a ritual reenactment of the age-old drama of order triumphing over chaos, a story first etched onto cylinder seals 1,000 years before Homer sang. Even the great goddess Athena, born fully armed from the head of Zeus, shares conceptual space with earlier warrior goddesses of the Near East, her wisdom and martial prowess a Hellenic refinement of a very ancient divine principle. This was not plagiarism, it was cultural metabolism. The Greeks absorbed these foreign narrative seeds and cultivated them in the unique soil of their own poetic imagination, allowing them to grow into the rich, interconnected tales that would define Western lore. Across the sea in Italy, the sophisticated Etruscans were conducting their own dialogue with the past. Though separated by centuries from the Minoan and Mycenaean worlds, their art retained a palpable echo of Aegean elegance and vitality. Look at the wall paintings in an Etruscan tomb, and you might feel a ghost of Knossos. The figures move with a fluid, joyful energy, their poses dynamic and graceful. Banquet scenes show reclining figures in a style that feels like a distant cousin to the courtly frescoes of the Bronze Age palaces. The Etruscans, master metalworkers and traders, were superb synthesizers. They borrowed from the Greeks to their east, but they also seemed to tap into an older, Mediterranean-wide aesthetic language, one that valued motion, ritual, and a celebration of life even in the face of mortality. Their elaborate bronze mirrors, engraved with mythological scenes, are not merely functional objects. They are portable galleries that continue the tradition of embedding cosmic stories into personal items, a practice that began with the cylinder seals of Mesopotamia. In the cool mists of northern Europe, a different kind of inheritance was being forged in iron and gold. Celtic artists, masters of intricate, abstract design, became the great custodians of the spiral. The vibrant, turning motif that once adorned the tombs of the Boyne Valley was not forgotten. It evolved, becoming more complex, more energetic. It intertwined with new forms like the trumpet pattern, a graceful, curling design that seems to mimic the bell of a horn. On the breathtaking gold torques worn by chieftains and on the hilts of ceremonial swords, these ancient patterns lived on. The Celtic spiral was no longer just a symbol of the sun or regeneration. It became a visual expression of the interconnectedness of all things, of the endless knot of fate and the natural world. Their art avoided literal representation, preferring to encode meaning in these mesmerizing, rhythmic abstractions, proving that the symbolic power of a simple turning line could endure for millennia, adapting to an entirely different spiritual vision. To see this legacy in its clearest light, we can follow two specific symbols on their long journey through time. The tree of life, that potent emblem of connection between heaven, earth, and the underworld, first appears in the art of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. On cylinder seals, it is often shown flanked by animals or deities, a sacred axis of the world. This powerful image traveled effortlessly. It appears in the wall carvings of Assyrian palaces, then is adopted into the decorative arts of the Phoenicians, those great maritime traders of the Iron Age. Through Phoenician influence, it enters the repertoire of Greek and later Roman art, often stylized into elegant, symmetrical patterns on vases and mosaics. Centuries later, it flourishes again in the illuminated manuscripts of the medieval period, now reinterpreted through a Christian lens as the Tree of Jesse, tracing the lineage of Christ. The symbol's core meaning, a source of life, wisdom, and divine connection, remained astonishingly constant, even as its religious context was completely transformed. Similarly, the motif of the hero battling a beast, from Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven to Heracles and the Hydra, becomes a bedrock theme in classical and medieval art. It is sculpted on Roman sarcophagi, symbolizing the soul's struggle, and painted in the margins of Gothic manuscripts, a reminder of the eternal fight between virtue and sin. This visual thread, stretching from Sumerian seals to cathedral walls, reveals something fundamental. These early Bronze Age designs were not just pretty pictures. They were incredibly efficient containers for complex foundational ideas about humanity's place in the cosmos, the nature of good and evil, and the cycle of life and death. Their endurance proves their power. They were shapes that the human mind, across cultures and epochs, consistently recognized as true. They provided a ready-made grammar for storytelling, allowing each new generation to tell its own stories while standing on the shoulders of artistic giants they never knew. The legacy of this ancient symbolic language is all around us, hidden in plain sight within the art of the worlds that came after, a silent, elegant testament to humanity's unbroken chain of visual thought. Our journey across the continents and millennia reveals a world far more connected by mind and motif than we often assume. Through the silent, persistent language of shared symbols, the sun disk, the spiral, the sacred bull, diverse civilizations participated in a slow, profound dialogue that stretched across deserts and seas. This was not a single, unified culture, but a series of brilliant, independent minds reaching for similar solutions. Their ideas then passed along the fragile threads of early networks. Whether sparked by the parallel workings of the human psyche or carried on the backs of traders and migrants, these cross-continental designs challenge the comfortable notion of complete isolation in antiquity. They whisper of a different story, one where a symbol carved in stone in one valley could, over centuries, find a home in the art of a people thousands of miles away, each culture pouring its own unique meaning into the familiar form. This shared visual vocabulary reminds us of something fundamental, that the deep urge to create meaningful patterns, to map our awe and our fears onto the world, is a trait woven into the very fabric of our species. As we look at these ancient symbols today, we are not just seeing static art or archaeological curiosities. We are glimpsing the early, flickering networks of human thought and connection, the first fragile webs that began to shape our collective story. They are proof that even in a world without satellites or scripts, ideas had wings and beauty had a passport. If this exploration into the deep, connected past resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the mysteries history has left for us. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these ancient symbols, the spiral, the bull, or the silent griffin, fascinates you the most? Share your reflections in the comments below.